Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. Longtime listeners of this show will know that it's been sort of a pet project of mine to give proper historical credit to Suck.com as maybe the web's most influential early content site. And so if you had asked me to make up a list of my top 10 dream interviews to land for this project, getting Carl Steadman and Joey Anuff on the show together to discuss the history of Suck, well, that would have been pretty near the top of that list, easily. So imagine my surprise and delight when this interview, with Joey and Carl together, turned out to be one of the easiest interviews to schedule. And when Joey and Carl said they would only do it together, or not at all, I was equally delighted. This will not be a normal episode of the podcast, however, because for one thing, it's way longer than usual. And for another, well, at some point, you're basically going to hear me throw out all of my notes and list of questions, because if there's one thing I've learned by being a lifelong Howard Stern listener, it's that when you hear radio gold happening, you basically owe it to your listeners to get out of the way and let it happen. Yes, we do get into a lot of interesting background and history regarding Wired, Hot Wired, and Suck, but eventually, I basically just let Joey and Carl go to it. Yes, I try to shoehorn my dumb history questions in here and there, but eventually I wise up and let the two of them just debate the debates of 20 years ago, argue about the meaning of the web in the modern world, and let them, in short, just give us some of that essence of what made Suck so smart and so influential 20 years ago. If you're unfamiliar with Suck, you're about to get a taste here of why so many of us have been such big fans of that site for so long. And if you're like me, a longtime fan of Joey and Carl, then you're about to get some of that old-time stuff for the first time in 20 years. It's great. Just listening to them debate is a historical marker in its own right. So smart, so thoughtful, and I basically called time on the proceedings towards the end and asked them to come back for round 2. And I meant that 100%. I'm definitely going to ask them to come back on the show, and I hope that they'll accept. In the meantime, please enjoy maybe my favorite episode of the podcast so far, this conversation with the founders of Suck.com, Joey Anuff and Carl Steadman. Joey Anuff, Carl Steadman, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Thanks for having us. Woohoo!
Carl, let's start with you. We like to get just a little bit of background before we get to the meat of things. You attended the University of Minnesota, right?
That I did.
What were you studying?
Cultural studies, basically hypertext. So I was waiting for the web to happen, waiting for years, and then it finally did.
Well, and also, University of Minnesota is where the Gopher protocol came from. Did you happen to know any of the guys involved with Gopher, or were you involved in that?
I worked down the hall from the Gopher people. They didn't like me much.
But
I would go into their offices and say, Gopher, it's dead. There's this web thing coming. And what they were working on at the time was virtual Gopher, which was a you would go into your Gopher browser. Did they call it or Gopher, whatever it was called? It wasn't a browser. Maybe it was a browser. And the virtual Gopher was you would type in what you were searching for, and then you would go into this 3D landscape, and it would zoom you around until you got to the campus of the university. It was all university-based that had the information you wanted. So a search that used to take maybe a few seconds would now take a few minutes, but you'd be floating through cyberspace while you got there.
That's so awesome.
Joey, Joey, you went to UC Berkeley?
Yep. Yeah.
And what were you studying?
Probably the same. I was getting down close to the bone over there at UC Berkeley, really trying to exhaust that resource, and just glean as much knowledge as one individual could.
But
your degree is in rhetoric.
I got a degree in rhetoric.
And correct me if I'm wrong, you actually had a previous sort of sideline as a comic book store mogul. Is that right?
That was my teenage life was as a purveyor and vendor of comic books back in the 80s. When I found myself as a sort of expatriate American kid in Puerto Rico, not really expatriate since Puerto Rico is part of the United States, but feeling culturally expatriated there and unable to get my weekly fix of comics, I managed to commandeer a retail operation my mom had launched there in 1983, and sort of subtly over a couple of years, and eventually with her help, change it from being a toy store into Puerto Rico's first comic book store, and eventually chain of comic book stores.
Would you?
And that, and those stores they were around for about 15 years, from like 1984 to 1999.
Would you say that maybe interest in animation and graphics and things like that maybe led you to computers?
100%. As a matter of fact, that probably led a lot of the people in the Bay Area in the first half of the 90s to computers, because that was sort of the dominant digital industry at the time. A lot of the people involved in Wired and just San Francisco people, as opposed to Carl, who, he got recruited from afar. Those of us who were just malingering around San Francisco, a lot of us were from the multimedia industry or something related to the multimedia industry. And that definitely included me and my brother. And that was driven by all kinds of desktop animation and macromedia-fueled nonsense of that era.
The tech industry has gone through a lot of crashes, and right before the web erupted, we had just gone through a CD-ROM crash, and so there were a lot of people from CD. Right.
Yep.
Well, Carl, let's go back to you and pick up the story then. So you're in Minnesota. You're eager for the web to arrive. It's arriving. Tell me the story though of the first time you learned about Wired magazine.
Oh, you've done your research. What is that story? I had a roommate at the time, Ben. He now runs one of the telecommunication companies in China. But we were both at the U, and he came to me. It was a blizzard conditions that weekend, and he knocked on my door and he said, "Carl, you have to come with me. You have to see something." And I wasn't all that convinced, but he finally got me to get my boots on and my winter jacket, and we actually had to trudge downtown because there was you couldn't drive that day. So we walked all the way downtown. It was probably an hour walk, and we walked into I think it was Schindler's bookstore, and there, behold, was a Wired magazine. It was the first issue, and I picked it up and said, "Hey, this is it." Up to then, there had been some attempts at writing about technology and culture, like Mondo and Boing Boing, some of those. But Wired got it. Wired not only had technology and culture, but it also incorporated business, and it was just right. It was perfect. Unfortunately, the politics were abhorrent, but I knew I had to be part of it.
You mentioned CD-ROMs. You had previously been writing for sort of a CD-ROM magazine called Uptime.
No, Uptime goes back before CD-ROM. So this is on a disc. So it's a magazine on a disc. The big one, there's Uptime, and then there was Soft Disk, and they were different. There were different editions for different computers. So there was an Amiga edition, an Apple II edition, a Commodore edition. and you would subscribe to them. They would come once a month, and it would come filled with articles and software that you could, so it'd come on a floppy disk, and you'd throw it in and read away, play away.
But so you did have previous experience writing about technology?
Yes.
And at the time that we're coming up to now, you graduate, I believe, and your first job out of college is at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune on their new online division?
Yeah, if you want to clean it up.
Okay. All right.
I was in no hurry to graduate. I think I'd been an undergraduate for 7 years at that point. I still didn't have my degree. I was working so I was one of those people that probably would have shifted into working at the university full time. So I had a job at the university. I was working for the Center for the Development of Technological Leadership, which was an MBA program for like the Kellogg School. And where was
I? Getting to the Minneapolis. Sorry.
Oh yeah. So the Star Tribune announced that it was going to launch online, and I wanted to be a part of that. And they launched on I believe at first it was the AT&T network. AT&T bought them out, and that turned into the Ziff Davis network. And I think Microsoft, no, it started as Microsoft. So it was Microsoft Marvel, which was then bought out by AT&T, which was then bought out by Ziff Davis. But the concept was the same with all three iterations, which was there were three anchor publications: the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, the Atlanta Constitution, I believe, and the Washington Post. And people would subscribe to that, and you would use your modem to dial online, see the newspapers, see the discussion boards, that sort of thing.
But as you say, when you see Wired, you determine that you want to work there. That's where it's at. So at some point, you send in a resume.
Yes.
And do you get a call back immediately? Do you remember the timeline? Anything like that?
Oh my! I get a call back. Well, not immediately, because it took. But I emailed in a resume. It wasn't the reason I say it wasn't immediately. Was by the time I got a call back, it was 4 PM, and I was dead drunk. My
as you are at 4 PM.
as one is. No, my girlfriend had just died, and I was a wreck. So I was drunk, and but a voice was over the phone, and he said, "This is Chip Ayers. Do you have time to talk about this job at Wired?" I said, "Sure, but I'm drunk." And we talked for an hour. I don't remember any of it, but apparently it went well because I had a ticket to go to San Francisco a week later.
So when you show up in San Francisco, this is roughly 94-ish, like summer, fall of 94?
I think, is it 94, Joey? I think it's just turning 95.
Okay.
No, yeah, I interview in 94, and then I start work in 95.
Gotcha. I read that you leave all your belongings behind. You just show up and put a bed in your office and sort of actually live in your office at the beginning.
That's almost true. I actually did. I tried for a while to get an apartment. So I had an apartment across the way. Joey moved in. But after a while, it was
before we get to that, let me ask you this, just so that I can clarify in my mind. Did you interview with those guys before or after Hawkwired launched? Because I remember Hawkwired launched in like October '94, right?
Yeah, it was short. It was shortly after. Like at that point, they knew Bellendorf was going to leave. They knew. Was it Michael Nelson? They knew Michael Nelson was almost out the door. So basically they had that crisis of that, you remember, the whole headbutting between Lewis and them. And so the first group of people were out the door, and I was come in to save the show, or whatever you would say.
So yeah, see, I don't know about that part because there was a lot of drama related to the launch of Hawkwired in 1994 that preceded my arrival and precipitated, apparently, their reaching out to Carl and advertising for that job in the first place. But I only knew that stuff, anecdotally.
Was the
Oh, I almost did not report into work because they made this dire mistake because they were so desperate to get up and running. Everything was falling apart. They put me on the internal mailing list while I was still in Minnesota. So I'm seeing these internal emails between these factions at this Wired Start, the Hot Wired, and they're arguing about T-shirts, like who gets a free T-shirt. And this, like the heat is, meanwhile they're supposedly running the website, but this T-shirt discussion is all out. And the CEO of the company, for some reason, is arguing with interns on the internal mailing list. So it gave me pause as to whether I really wanted to go there.
So what is your impression?
You were drawn.
What's your impression when you actually do show up? Like, is it chaos? Is it, because this is kind of, again, an early real job for you. So what's your impression of what Wired was like?
It was an early real job, but my first impression was that I was the only one there who had ever had a real job. So everyone else was straight out of college. And so my first impression was no one knew how good they had, because it was very smart people, like, who didn't know how to work in an office, but very bright, like the most talented group of people I'd ever worked with. And no one could appreciate it, which really got me down at times. But the first day I walked in, I believe they were having server troubles, and so that they couldn't keep the server up. And I figured out it was the power cable. No one thought to check the power cable, so I swapped that out and kept that running, which meant engineering didn't like me for the longest time because I wasn't in engineering.
And I even though I believe you that happened, I'd like to say that sounds like a fiction to me, that you swapped out a power cable. That's like some Aaron Sorkin shit right there.
Well, it was a twofold problem. One was so I didn't actually figure out the real problem for a few days later, because it turned out they had a coffee maker on that same circuit. And so when the coffee maker would switch on, it would blow out the web server power supplies, or it would blow out the circuit. And that had taken one of the cords. Yeah, it does sound like a Sorkin scenario.
Yeah, that makes it sound like negative 2,000% less credible. Saying that it was overloaded by the coffee machine on the circuit. That does not make it less TV movie of the week. One thing that can I just point
Sure.
out that something that Carl's not mentioning, but that it would make sense to mention, considering that his citations of Mondo and Boing Boing as the sort of tech cultural rags of that moment, was that when he stepped in, he was stepping into a job opportunity created by the political maelstrom and settling of political ideologies that was, there was sort of ground zero there at Wired that was playing out, that was the exact same tension that happened between sort of the hippie aspect reflected through Mondo, the whiz kid aspect of Boing Boing, and the actual techno-capable aspect of Hotwired that would eventually emerge, and the business-centric third-way realism of Louis Rosetto at Wired. So there was a lot of conflict there and visions of what the web was going to stand for. And it's not surprising that they managed to waste what sounds like a whole year just arguing about stuff that, Carl might say that they were arguing about T-shirts, but I'm sure that from their perspective, it was about just the most ground-level political disputes that have ever been made.
It's about property rights and who owns the brand.
Exactly.
Well, wasn't also one of the big fights of the time just about the registration policy. Initially, Wired launches, and you can only view it if you sign on and create a username and password, right?
Yes, but that wasn't. Yes, no, you're right. That was by the time I came in. That had already been an argument. It had been settled. Lewis had won. There would be registration, and then I don't know if we're there yet. But then I would bring that up again. Talk to Rick Boyce, who was in charge of advertising. Talk to Andrew Anker, who was the CEO of Hot Wired, and we started a bit of a skunkworks project to pull that off, to take away registration.
Boy, that's a good subject that I'm sure that you get into. That's a subtext to a lot of the discussions you have on your podcast, Brian. The life and death struggles over certain UX concerns and UI concerns that were just really preoccupied the attention of a lot of engineers and designers trying to settle these things that now might be settled questions, but back then seemed like if you went the wrong way, you might be courting the most disastrous outcome and possibly betraying some special ethic that is inherent to the medium.
Well, it's funny that you say that, because I've had Andrew Anker on, I've had Rick Boyce on. I did a special episode where just talking about the first banner ads, and everybody made that point. I talked about 5 or 6 people. Everyone made that point. There were no templates, so there's no previous models to work from. So a lot of the fighting is just about there's no previous case law on this. So you're making it up as you go along.
Yeah, I believe I have the original blackboards that have the ad banners. So they're foam core, and they actually have mock-up web pages with ad banners on them for MCI and someone else. I believe I have those. I might have given them to Lewis. But so I walk in, and I want to have this discussion because it's clear that for me, like, there were business reasons that you did not want registration, but for me, it was about linking. The web, this thing that I'd been waiting for, the web, was about linking from one site to another. And with registration, you suddenly couldn't do that. It would just be paywall after paywall. So I needed to get rid of that. And that's one of the reasons I went there. But the first time I brought it up, other people were in the room, and I was quickly shushed and told I couldn't talk about that.
Well, I don't mean to yada yada over that story, but I'm eager to bring Joey into the chronology. So unless we're missing a bunch of stuff here, let's get to the point where you convince your bosses that you need to hire an assistant. Joey, we should probably go back. Do you remember your first exposure to Wired magazine?
Oh yeah, definitely. I remember something that's also not understood very well because it didn't really establish itself in the culture, was the degree in the popular culture, in the wider broadcast culture, and the kind of historical culture that we look back on, like movies or TV shows and syndication from the time. Not that there are really any now. There probably are, but I can't think of them. But one thing that's lost is the degree to which we were living in a zine culture and a DIY culture and a small press culture from the period of like 85 right up into the internet era of 95. This was a time when Tower Records was a huge national chain and brought with it a national network. And a lot of the energy that these days would get expressed in Tumblrs and blogs and a whole lot of online platforms like Medium happened at a self-publishing level, taking advantage of the technological backbone network of Kinko's and copy shops.
Just to interrupt, I remember in '98, I think, Kinko's opened down the street from me, and I was so excited. And the person who was with me said, "Why do you care?" And I said, it's Kinko's. I can write a zine. So go on.
You should have. And then, and that's where I think that. I tend to think that like about every year, that this is going to be the perfect year for the zine revival, and I should put it out. And it probably actually would have a better impact and a better chance of being remembered in 10 or 20 years if you did put out a limited zine of 50 copies in 2016 as opposed to putting a blog.
Well, that's how Frauenfelder. That's how Frauenfelder relaunched Boing Boing. He started as a zine again, and then then it turned into the website, right?
So it was not. So Wired didn't come out of nowhere. Wired actually sort of came out of that small publishing zine culture. And for me, the first time that I saw Wired was when they got their first office space, which was right next to my brother's software company's office space in right off of South Park in the South of Market area of San Francisco. My brother had a multimedia authoring tools company down there called MotionWorks, and there was an open space, and that opened next door to it. And the first things that I saw was mock-ups of the covers of 2 different magazines show up in the windows of that office space, and they were Might magazine and Wired.
Oh, Might, right.
So every time I would go over there to visit Ed, and that was at a time when I was going there all the time because I was also doing multimedia authoring. I was doing animation, CD-ROM stuff, and so I was spending a lot of time over at Ed's business. I was also living in San Francisco, so we could see that company from issue 1 to issue 2 slowly start to put itself together. And even though I never saw them working there, I never saw them doing anything there. I never saw the Might people or the Wired people actually in their office. But you knew that something was happening because stuff would show up pasted on the insides of their windows. And so I didn't actually see the first copy of Wired. I started reading it when the second issue came out. And for me, it was really distinct from Mondo. And Mondo had been on my radar prominently for the years before that, from let's say 91 to 94. Mondo was pretty much it for a whole bunch of tech-centric alternative culture in the Bay Area. They were out of the East Bay as opposed to Wired, which was out of San Francisco, and they were definitely more of a piece with the sort of freak culture you would expect from classic 60s San Francisco, updated for the day-glow 90s. And they did a lot of drugs, and it could tell. I mean, they were already sort of, they were kind of a little bit burnt out, and on every other article was about some kind of different drug thing, and you could kind of tell.
They weren't just drugs. They were smart drugs.
Smart drugs, and also just the experimental pharmaceutical scene that was then getting started in California, which I think has brought a lot of those people together, where they were just starting to do all kinds of weird drugs out of the laboratories.
I love the photo spreads where they would glue plastic, like disk drive parts or whatever, on nude models. Which made no sense whatsoever.
Yeah, that stuff was. It was definitely. It's not like it didn't seem corny at the time. It did. It definitely. It wasn't that far from watching goths dancing to yakety saxes today. It sort of looked exactly just like that back then, and that was also the emergence of the rave culture. So you got to factor that in there too. The original rave 90s in West Coast rave culture came up, and that was definitely part of it too. So the fact that Wired came out, they were a lot more straight-laced and serious, but not in a boring way. Just more like you seemed like you could have a conversation with them, and that it wouldn't become really weird. Like they seemed to just bring a slightly more intense cognitive edge to their pursuits than just getting fully lit and fucked up. And you could imagine their utopian dreams actually being transpiring because of some sort of commercial or academic force behind it, as opposed to just, people basically doing the ogre routine from Revenge of the Nerds and saying, "Oh wow, what if God is dogs backward," or something. I mean, like they were a little more together. That was sort of like the John Battelle factor to it. I don't know whether you ever did an interview with him.
I have, yes, actually.
Yeah, he was definitely one of the straighter laced, more legitimate journalism-minded figures there at Wired, and he gave it a good feel, I think, for that first year or two. Made it seem like it was really balancing legitimate journalism with the futurism that didn't seem like it was wild-eyed futurism. It seemed like it was actually, well considered, soberly considered futurism.
Well, let's bring you into the Wired story here. So, how either one of you or both, how does Carl come to hire Joey?
Do you actually apply? Go ahead.
I applied. I mean, for me, it was a big deal. In '94, I had already started moving away from doing CD-ROM-oriented multimedia work, and I was already starting to do contracts for web development and putting together people's web presences. I'm not even sure what we were calling it. I mean, it was probably just websites, we called it back then, but that let me use all of the assorted Adobe chops that I'd built over the first couple of years of the '90s and put them to work on trying to design web pages and make them look cool, and throwing in unconventional uses of HTML. I was definitely at that point in my life where I was trying to make every tag break, see what you could do with it. And there weren't any, the only thing that I would think then was, one, can I get contracts putting together websites for people and get paid really well to do it? Or two, would it be possible to take some of the stuff that I was even then doing in the written zine culture and start doing that online? And I definitely remember talking to friends I had in San Francisco who were more of the print zine world and being really motivated by how dismissive and skeptical they were about anything online. They just thought that was totally ridiculous. So that made me think, no, this isn't ridiculous. I'm sure that I could. You just felt that you could get as much of an audience for something you did online, if not more, and get more of a publishing experience than you would from having an edition of 50 or 100 copies of something that you were hustling through Fact Sheet 5 or trying to get into Tower Distribution and running off at Kinko's. So that was a big motivator, because that was also '94 was the first time that I'd started to do some writing for magazines and zines.
Carl,
I was writing
toward the end of '94. Hot Wired launches.
So I was
writing.
The
first time I'd seen. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Go.
I was writing an HTML tutorial book at the time, but I wasn't finished with it. So it was a struggle. I remember going through the first stack of resumes, and it was a struggle to find anyone who had any real-world experience putting together websites, and I really needed that for this position. So I asked Chip Bayers, who was my boss at the time, if there were any more resumes. And he said no. So I looked through my stack of resumes again, and they're just like, I think I might have called one person, but there really wasn't anyone there. And so I asked him again, you sure you don't have any more resumes? And he opened up a bottom filing cabinet. No, at first he said, well, in the circular file.
Right.
And I said, so you don't have them? And he said, no, they're in the bottom filing cabinet. So he pulled up this stack of reject resumes, and they were rejects for a reason, but there was one
richly deserved.
But there was one piece of gold in there, and that was Joey's resume.
And I believe he starts it off something like, well, you can kill yourself. Is that right?
Or, yeah, you can kill yourself or you can hire me.
Right. So obviously,
well,
that's the guy
that was
that you have to
subject
hire.
line-minded message composition. You got to grab them above the fold.
Right. So, Joey, what's your impressions when you get to Wired, Hot Wired, whatever umbrella you're technically under? What are your impressions of the operation?
Well, there were a lot. There was a lot. That was a whirlwind. Both, I would say I can remember really well my impressions from the day of my interview to getting started, the first couple of weeks. It was definitely it was definitely intense because it was a mix of people you wouldn't normally expect. I mean, there was a fair range of technical and editorial competency and design chops in one place that I wouldn't have. I mean, there was a lot of pretension. There was a lot of ego. There was just there was a lot of people there with a lot to prove, and a lot of people with real respectable personas, that defied simple categorization.
You should talk about how I warned you not to take the job.
I can't even remember. I mean, you might have done that, but I can't even remember you warning me not to take the job because I know from the walkthrough. I remember just walking through.
I took you out. I took you out to the back staircase, and I told you what we paid, and I said you shouldn't do this job for that. And I remember you. I remember counseling you not to take the job. You're way too talented for what we were paying.
Did you guys hit it off?
Yeah. What's that?
Did you guys hit it off?
I think we did.
Oh, I knew I liked Joey. Go ahead.
I mean, I definitely hit it off with Carl and with a lot of the people there. That was a great place to work, and all of the people there were very fun. I mean, just having lunch every day was a lot of fun. Talking with the people about anything there was always pretty thought provoking. I started reading Wired different. I started reading probably everything different. I remember reading this Esther Dyson white paper that was published in Wired at the time, where she started her thesis statement on ancillary marketing and different ways that you would approach the value proposition of publishing online, and just thinking, I really have to read this and understand it because this would be a really good thing to talk to about with these people, to be like Gary Wolf and Chip or whoever, just to see where they stand. I mean, do they really give a shit about this stuff? And a lot of them did. A lot of people there legitimately gave a shit about all kinds of issues related to digital publishing.
So Joey mixed in well. I didn't fit in so much with the Wired crowd.
Who do we get to blame then for the idea of suck?
Wired.
I guess that's technically true, yeah.
No, but so I think about 3 months in to Joey's employ, he submitted a piece of writing to what was Net. What was it called? Net. Joey?
I'm trying to remember what the name of the culture section of Wired was.
Yeah.
No.
So he submitted something. I don't know. You'll come up with it. So he submitted a piece to the culture section at Hot Wired, and he showed it to me first. It was a good piece. It was strongly written. It had point of view. It was an excellent piece, and he submitted it to them, and they rejected it. And I think he did that again, and they rejected it, and a third time, and they rejected it. Meanwhile, I'm having all sorts of problems with Hot Wired as far as just how you run, like basic, largely UX issues. more so than content issues. But we also had some contributors who just didn't seem right for the brand to me. So both of us were having these frustrations, which led up to the two of us beginning to talk about doing something. And originally, I just the name for it was, and I regret calling it this today. I was young. We called it the Hot Wired Killer. We didn't have the name stuck for a while, and the idea was just to put something together that would show people how it was done.
How it was done in what way? Like what was it that you wanted to do?
How anything was done. See, this is the thing. Like this is the dark side of and why I stress so much that you got to understand the politics of of all these UX UI crap. What that means is when you say that there's politics, it's that you have a bunch of opinionated people who need to stop you from doing what you're doing because that will ruin their idea for what they're doing. So there's all these people who are proposing standards and ways of seeing and publishing that preclude you doing whatever you think is your idea. And there's an absurdity to being in this open publishing system where anybody can publish anything and anybody can launch their own publication, and you got there, but they hired you because you knew how to publish. You know how to set up your own website, and then suddenly you're being told, oh, you can't link like this because you're using a link as a joke, and it should be a primary. That's called a tertiary link. We only do primary links. You know, and it's just like, what the hell are you talking about? It's one thing to have an idea, but everybody was trying to establish themselves as an authority, and it was like the allegory of the cave all over again with all these theories about the shadow. You know,
and remember, this is a year into the entire. You know, we had only had a graphical web for a year, so it was a little early to be making pronouncements.
So it's sort of like if it's the analogy would be you guys are having trouble butting heads as a member of a band, so go off and do a solo project so you can get out the songs that you really want to be working on.
I'd make a Detroit analogy myself.
Go ahead.
To build a car.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't know much about cars.
I agree. Very, very trite. Trite, Brian.
I believe he said Detroit, not trite, but I heard trite first also.
No, I actually said Detroit. But we were trying to build a car, and we have, you know, at the beginning you would have there were different ideas about where to put the accelerator pedal, and it was a bit early to be deciding on that.
So regardless,
that's a bad analogy too. Sure, band, why not?
But regardless,
we can split the difference. It was Motown.
Oh, I like that.
So
no, it was just, you know, you know, it was like it was just hard to keep your mouth shut. It was just hard to be there when there was so much encouragement, and the rhetoric was at such odds with the reality that you really was forced to ask yourself, how am I going to go and be being paid by a magazine whose mission statement is about open access and this creative revolution, where I can't even get something published? That doesn't make any sense. And they're telling you, launch your own thing from the server room if you want, because we're just that open. Anybody can do it. And so you just think, you know what? I think I'm going to take you up on your advice. I'm going to take you up on that offer without even letting you know. But I will just publish my own magazine, and then we'll let the traffic, we'll let the web decide what works. And even without letting them know, just sort of having the being 23 or 24 and wanting to have a voice, even if you don't necessarily have a ton to say. You know, they lean on you to get stuff done, so you have a certain technical proficiency sometimes that your own managers don't even have. Yet at the same time, they want to be so controlling of the final product. You just kind of wonder, well, why am I taking orders from you? I mean, I'm the digital native. I'm the one actually grappling with the HTML. Why, other than the fact that I don't have much? Go ahead.
That also extends out to the politics. I was like, when I came in, I was very aware that the politics tilted right. It was libertarian right, but it was still right, and I was quite uncomfortable with that. And one of the reasons I wanted to come to Wired, to go to Wired, was to try to shape the ideology of Wired. And it became clear that even though my plan was to change it from within, it would be much more difficult than I had originally thought. And so starting Suck was a part of making that sort of political statement.
So am I hearing this right then, that the initial audience that you're envisioning for Suck is maybe inside Wired's offices, or at the very least its goal is to poke at the Wired culture?
Definitely.
Yeah. Yes and no, because Pathfinder existed too. So things were let's go back to authentication. So authentication exists.
Pathfinder wasn't as pretentious as Wired.
Right, but here's what was happening with authentication. So you go to the Hotwired site and you get this, and we should explain what authentication even is. You go to the Hotwired site and you get this screen that says log in or join, or as Joey would call it, threat or menace.
And that's before you can read anything, before you can read word one.
That's before all you get is a logo, log in, or join. It doesn't even tell you what the benefits of logging in or joining is. That's all you see, log in or join. And Pathfinder, so I'm working in the background to be able to pull that system down. But in the meantime, Pathfinder is working based on Hotwired's precedent to put that system up for themselves. So I was seeing, and Pathfinder and Hotwired were the two major websites in the world. So I have the feeling if this happened with both sides, the web would be dead, because others would follow suit, and suddenly you would not have an open web, which was a real danger.
Yeah, I mean that's also a strange thing that happens when you suddenly have to take responsibility for your own output to the culture. You realize that the stuff you're working on might actually have an impact, especially when you're early enough and you're working in a small enough territory. You can start developing anxiety of your own influence.
You guys, when you start, I think you launch it in like August of '95. It's just the two of you with maybe Joey, your brother Ed is involved also, but it's basically just the two of you at the beginning, right?
It's just the two of us at the beginning. It was about 6 months in gestation, between 4 and 6 months in gestation. In that gestation period, we didn't do much more than talk. I think we had a prototype up about a month before we launched. So back to this registration thing. Not only after you registered, after you get the login and join, once you logged in or joined, you still wouldn't see any content. You would get to a front door, what was called a front door, which was analogous to a table of contents of a magazine. So they were using sort of a magazine metaphor. So you would then see this page that would tease you to see these various articles. So now we're 2 clicks in. Then you would get another click, not to see the article, but to see sort of what was called a splash page for the article. And then, so the 4th click would actually take you to the article. So one of the things we wanted to do with Suck, I really wanted to do with Suck, was you would go there and you could actually read something when you got there. It would be content.
There's no preamble.
So I thought that, exactly.
Which, I mean, that is descriptive of a time in 1995 when there was all kinds of simple tricks that made you wonder, well, imagine if you did something this simple. Imagine if you didn't have 3 layers between whatever the hell it was you were trying to say and the front door of your site. What if you took away the splash screen, or took away the authentication, or took away the table of contents, with all of this junk, which, I mean, for a lot of people, that couldn't even load. I mean, this was a time when issues related to bandwidth were very real. Even today people get rightfully concerned about how many resources they're sending and streaming and bundling and minification and stuff like that. I mean, Jesus, it was out of control at first. There was real cause to be concerned with stuff like this, because even in its early incarnation, Hotwired for me was the site that you would go when you wanted to test the bandwidth to see whether you were on a really good connection, because it took so long to download the giant splash screens and their huge graphics that unless you had a really great line, it was just not going to happen. So, I mean, forget about just natural attrition in your click rate, your click stream. Some people would never have enough bandwidth to make it through 3 pages of Hotwired.
So you're sort of doing the strip it down. It's just the simple, and in fact we should talk about the page design of Suck, which is just it's that center column and basically nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, It was centered text on black on white, which was unbelievably something that nobody had done, because like many pieces of received wisdom that had not yet been challenged by anybody, the idea that text had to be on a light gray was just the industry standard.
I was just trying to make something readable. Just wanted people to read what we wrote.
And what are you writing about at first? Is it tech industry stuff generally? What sort of stuff are you writing about?
Douchebags.
Mm.
Is that true?
Mark Andreessen was the very first person we wrote about.
Yeah, I thought we never called him a douchebag.
People didn't call people douchebags back then. I mean, they did.
Wait. Suck never called anyone a douchebag? I find that hard to believe.
No, what I'm saying is that there was such a sense of overarching irony that you would never come out and say anything about anything. It was always buried within the text, which was part of the charm.
Yeah, but I mean, it was at the very least, the least we could do is give grief to somebody like a Mark Andreessen, and there were a couple of other specific players back in the day, many of whom have been subject of other Internet History podcast episodes, who deserved being called out by name just for being a little bit just too presumptuous in laying down the law of what the web was about and what the internet was supposed to be. And so, either that or bringing just some genuinely crass commercial, just I don't know, just clumsy. There were elements of clumsy commercialism that just deserved to be pricked. And a perfect example of that was like the blink tag. That was Mark Andreessen's first big deal.
That wasn't Andreessen.
It wasn't Mark.
That was not Andreessen.
It was John Mittelhauser, I believe, but I might be wrong on that. But it's somebody that I have interviewed actually. So go on.
That was a joke. Now I lost my thread. We wanted to write about popular culture and tech culture, but we wanted to write about it in a new way, which was it was my feeling and Joey's as well, that you had, like, people were going to newsstands and they still had magazines on newsstands at the day, or tune in on the TV, and they were being told about this great internet you could log on to and do all these wonderful things. And if anyone actually went to the trouble of getting a modem, dialing up, like subscribing to one of the ISPs or AOL, they would, inevitably find there was really nothing there. It was all hype. And so I wanted Suck to be about calling that out, but also starting to lay the groundwork for how you actually produce content that people would want to read, would want to see.
Yeah, because, even by 95, it was clear that simple, reflexive techno-skepticism was a dead end, too. I mean, you think that might seem like a more modern phenomenon, but it wasn't. I mean, there was Clifford Stoll was more vocal in 95.
Right.
There were people who were talking about just how this stuff was all overrated, and you had to ask yourself, where's the middle line between pie in the sky utopianism and just simple, don't believe the hypeism.
Right.
So how?
It seemed like, it seemed like the thing to do if you really wanted to embrace the medium and do something with it, and you really saw it as your medium, which is definitely the way I felt. I mean, I felt like Carl and I had as much claim to defining and standing for what the web for the web as any of these people. That you had to be able to go and just
you had to be of the medium you critique. You had to be of the medium you critiqued. So it's not enough to write about a film. You have to make another film if you want to critique a film. The same is true of any medium, including the web. If you want to critique the web, it's not enough to write something about it in a magazine. You have to actually make something that gives an example of what you're trying to get at.
Well,
I mean, there was nothing, and there was nothing stopping people from doing that either. So it seemed a little premature to either dismiss it or to try to start, writing tributes to it. Like, let's see what it's capable of first. Maybe it's going to change the world. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's going to do stuff that none of us really know. But except for the fact that there's more of a market for boosterism than there is for the actual product, there's nothing that's demanding that you proclaim it one way or the other. So it seemed like there was actually just more. There was more clearing of throats than actual, going and saying something.
So what is the uptake to this Emperor Has No Closing that you two are doing? Like, how soon do you find that Suck is kind of striking a chord with people?
But again, it's not Emperor Has No Clothes. It's we're actually building him a suit.
Mm-hmm.
So, right.
So the question still is...
Right, or it's like the Emperor Has No Clothes, but that's okay because, we weren't looking for clothed photos. We know exactly what we're looking for.
And it ain't clothes.
So how soon does it strike a chord with people? Do you guys see, first week, first month, like people starting to talk about it and things like that?
Yeah, we saw exponential growth to begin with, which sounds like a lot, but it isn't a lot when you start with one or two. I guess there were two of us. But so within the first day, we were in the tens. The second day we were in the hundreds. The third day we were in the thousands. And we started getting press inquiries soon after that. But there was an issue to the press inquiries, which was we wrote all the pieces synonymously.
Right. Actually, I had a question about that. So how committed are you guys to keeping the identity of Suck, keeping that secret from Wired and Hotwired?
We were pretty serious about it. Except for a couple of our friends, nobody knew. That was definitely part of the charm. And it also was trying to underline our skepticism, not for the media, but for the media's profits, because it seemed like the real brand that they were selling was their byline. It seemed like most people out there were basically going for some kind of incipient writerly careerist take on it.
Right.
And we thought that the best thing to do would be to subvert that by not even having your name. So clearly you weren't trying to build a personal brand. You weren't trying to get to be the next Negroponte. You were just trying to say something true.
Yeah, in the early days, there were a lot of careerists trying to establish their own brands. Bylines were desperately important. People would fight over they would go top or bottom, and we were trying to build a house brand, which would do something else.
So the pseudonyms sort of help develop that voice because it is just it's the suck voice more than anybody's individual voice.
It's also it's also a question of what's possible. The pseudonymic tendency which people indulge in to this very day is something that's natural and is sort of an inherent natural element of online. The fact that you can say something anonymously tempts you to do it, and it brings out a different voice out of you.
Yeah, if you scroll something on a bathroom, if you scroll something on a bathroom wall, you don't put your own name to it.
Well, I mean that might be true for you. I like to sign my work. In general, I take your point.
A couple of just really kind of basic nuts and bolts questions. Are you working collaboratively, or are you like one of you puts up one thing and one of you puts up the other, or like is it collaborative or just whatever comes into your head?
Super collaborative.
And
preposterously.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We're both in the production department.
It was exquisite corpse style, actually.
So
it was really. It was. It was like I would write something and Carl would finish it.
Oh, really?
And it wasn't like, I'd look over his edits and say, oh, yeah, that's okay. No. He took it, and whatever the fuck he wanted to do with it, that was going to get written, and then it was going to get put up. And it was going to get signed by somebody else, by some made-up name anyway. So whatever. As long as he put it up, that was the most important thing. That's pretty collaborative.
For years, it would haunt me because I was in the back of my mind. I would walk around and think, am I a better editor than I am a writer? Because I really want, and like I had Joey, and Joey's just a brilliant writer. So I was editing Joey's stuff, and it was the sum was definitely better than the sum of its part. What the whole was better than the sum of its parts. But it would be years before I would go writing on my own and actually feel that I had proven myself as a writer.
So meanwhile, it did just a trick for proving to myself that I never ever wanted to write again, nor did I have anything that I wanted to share with the world on an online media.
Yeah, what is going on with that? Why don't you write?
Because I don't believe that the proper use of the internet is for self-expression unless you crucially have something that's missing from the dialogue and you need to say it. I mean, I like people who go and rant, and I like people who get their word out, and I like anybody who, plays their particular identity politics or their minority politics or has their say. I think that's fantastic. But just speaking your mind for the sake of speaking your mind online is like clearly where does it end? Very little of what you can actually say is going to be something that nobody else has said. When you get down to it, the responsible use. True. No, but it's not so true that even before you make a joke, you should be. You could search Twitter and find 20 people who made literally the same joke beforehand. I mean, at that point, you start asking yourself, what is the point of this, other than trying to say, "Oh, I'm here." And that's where I think your worth as a writer really comes. And Carl, now, I would say Carl's the better writer, because when Carl writes now... What?
The point is to win hearts and minds. It's always been to win hearts and minds.
I don't think that's true. No, I don't think that's true. I think it is hearts and minds, but it's also, some degree of self-expression that you really feel communicates. Even though you go through life thinking that you're doing a lot of communication, sometimes you produce something that is a higher level of communication. And at some point in your life, that might be editorial, that might be text, it might be an essay, but and depending on where you are as a writer, it might actually be something that is more like literature, and that's perfectly valid. But I think it's really important to know what it is that you're trying to achieve and ask yourself whether you're really focusing your creativity on something that's going to stand the test of time. Because, we are not just going against one another when it comes to being creative.
Joey, nothing
the part of the lesson of the internet is that
the sun is going to encompass the earth, and we're all going to be gone. It's all pointless.
No, it's not.
What are you trying to say?
It's not. No, I don't think that's true. I think that there's a counter lesson that you can learn from the internet, is that nothing is going away. It's all sticking around for good. And a lot of the stuff that we think of as just sort of transient is not. It is the bathroom wall scroll that is never getting scrubbed off. It's going to be up there forever, and people are going to relate to it and relate back to it for many, many hundreds of years. You think of everything as flying by so fast, but the more that the internet progresses, the more I think the past becomes solid. When stuff comes online, it becomes accessible, and we start. You have to assume the responsibility of the fact that you're a peer with everybody that's ever produced anything in the past and anybody who's ever going to produce anything in the future. It's all going to be part of that same internet. It's all going to be just as Googleable. And so, some people at any particular given century have come and have produced things that still get consumed hundreds of years later. A lot of people produce, a lot of very transient.
Joey, nothing any of us, well, very few of us will be remembered 100 years from now. Very few of us.
Well, that might be true, but for those of us who do, you know what? It's not entirely a question of what we've managed to produce up until, when we were in our 20s or our 30s. In the standard view of time, people's masterworks...
So 100 years from now, people are going to look back and say, wow, Joey didn't write anything in his 40s. What a great guy.
Could
he
be.
did us all a favor.
I do something... well, in a way, I do feel like I achieved something really substantial when I keep my mouth shut. I do feel like I'm doing something that takes a lot of self-control and is contributing a lot to the welfare of my peers and friends.
Yeah, I've noticed that people seem to like me better when I keep my mouth shut, but I don't know if that's doing anyone a favor.
Look, the bottom line is, Carl, you may or may not be remembered in 100 years, but it's not going to come down to your tweets. It's going to come down to whether you end up writing a book.
That's true.
And nobody's going to care when you write that book, whether you're 60, 70, or whether you did it when you're 20. The question is going to be how important and how good is that book. So, I mean, I personally might not accomplish anything, and I might not do anything for the age. Probably none of us will. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try for it. I feel like the real responsibility we have, and that the network demands of us, the internet and just the network at large, is to just find our place in the index of everything. And you got to, and I think just understanding that we are peers to every other creative professional that's put anything on the grid it's just a fact. And the fact that and however signed on we are on Twitter or Facebook is probably might make us feel more like we fit in more, but it doesn't really get at our actual life's work, which is to produce some sort of creative or some sort of work of substance that stands for something.
When I was saying you don't write anymore, I didn't mean you don't write on Facebook or Twitter. I was meaning
I write a lot of JavaScript. I would prefer to write JavaScript than I would to write an essay.
Okay.
Code is poetry.
That's what I mean. Well, Honestly, I would much rather put my time writing lines of JavaScript than I would trying to get a zinger on, especially when, I've worked with professional comedy writers. I've worked with people who do that for a job, and it is a job, and it's really hard. And if I had amazingly funny things to say, the last place I would do it would be on Twitter, unless I was a career comedian, unless I was a professional comic, and that was part of my stage routine, and that was part of my act and my career was maintaining a Twitter presence. Then that would make sense. But it's not like a minimum requirement of being a participant in civilization that you're constantly manifesting your personality all the time and writing every funny thing you think and sharing it. Like, it is possible to keep a notebook of your own stuff.
Joey, Twitter for me is a reminder of how insignificant I am. Like, I'll tweet something, and I'm lucky if I get 1, maybe 2 likes. And that for me is a real gift. It's telling me that, hey, Carl, you're not that important. You still need to do something.
That's a real sort of like dark side, bright side look, and I like it. It seems like it could be a constructive approach to handling being ignored. I just think that if you assume that nobody, like most things you do are not going to get are going to get 2 likes and be ignored. So there's no. You might as well take your time and do the thing about. I mean, it makes very little practical difference whether you wrote your stuff in a notebook or whether you wrote it on Twitter. The most important thing is that you wrote it. Like, in the end, there will be a reckoning about Carl, and your stuff will get published, and your best stuff will get collected. It will happen in the same way that Brian is interviewing us now. Like, there will be some historians of Carl. That. So your stuff is going to get winnowed, however terrifying that might seem. But, the stuff you do that's good, even the tweets you do that are good, whether they got liked or not, somebody with a clear eye is going to see them in the future.
That's bullshit. But
it's not bullshit.
You better be writing notebooks too. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, I write tons of stuff. I mean, I've written, like, if you were to go and look at my Twitter page or my Facebook page, you see almost no posts. Now, I have written hundreds of tweets and Facebook posts. I just never post them because they get to the one point where either they're good enough where I think, fuck it, I'm not going to waste this on Facebook. This could be an essay. This could be part of something. Or they're so dubious, I say to myself, you know what, I better sleep on this and see how I feel about it tomorrow. And then when I think about it tomorrow, I think, you know what, that one needs a little more work. But rarely this is like, oh man, this is not only perfectly executed, but the perfect place for it would be on Facebook. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen that much.
So one of the great things about Suck was we decided to put up on the top of the page updated weekdays, which meant we had this weekdays. We wanted to create an experience where you came back each day, a habit, an addiction, where you came back each day to see what we were saying. So we put updated weekdays up on top. I actually built a back end so we could queue up the pages ahead of time, the stories ahead of time, so we could schedule them and be sleeping at that time. It never worked out. It was like that for maybe the first 3 days, and then we were behind schedule. And so we were staying up all night writing these essays, trying to get something up.
But it's important to point out that you're one of the first to recognize that, because Hotwired is still sort of existing in this magazine model, like update weekly or whatever. But you guys are some of the first to discover the value on the web is to create a habit of people coming back and refreshing the page and trying to find if there's something new posted.
Right.
Some people have pointed this out, but that's also slightly a side effect of us also being some of the first wired professionals. So people who had internet at their desktop at work, and you realize how much of an opportunity there was to play into people's procrastination tendencies. If you've got an internet connection, if you've got a Netscape browser on your work machine, chances are you're going to spend some time on it instead of doing your job.
Right.
I always imagined it would be the first thing. Like, someone would get up, go to their computer, log on, and the first thing they would do would be to read Suck. And I was actually surprised when it turned out that some people did that, but many would wait until lunch, until they were at work with their big bandwidth connections.
So I want to, in the interest of time, I'm going to elide over a little bit of stuff here because I want to get to, eventually you do get discovered by Wired. Wired buys Suck, incorporates Suck into the general operations. And so now you have a budget and you can start hiring outside people. So let's start to talk about that. Like, how do you bring on other voices into Suck?
Well, that's just sort of like the founding of any kind of publication. It's not super different than probably the staffing of any blogs like Gawker or you go and we found a bunch of people, found some people who had the art chops, some people who had the writing chops. We took advantage of a lot of people who were interested in doing freelance stuff for us, and we turned it into a little shop that could run on itself, and where we could hire the people that we thought were the smartest, best writers we knew, or the best, most available artists we knew to do work for us and get paid.
In those early days, Joey used to describe his dream, which would be to get up in the morning and log into Suck and not believe what incredible crap they were publishing on the site that was once his. So that's what we were going for.
We'd achieved that
pretty
early.
We never got there. Okay.
Oh, you mean like incredibly good stuff?
No, incredible. Right? I think both. Like it was more true for me because I left. But I remember getting up and just reading Suck and saying, "My God, what are they doing?" Sometimes it was great. Sometimes it wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was Suck was like, listen, one of the things that I've done in the past couple of years, and I talked with Carl, has heard probably too much about this from me in the past year or so, was in my cramming of pop culture, which I never stopped doing and is a lifelong pursuit for me. One of the most recent things I've done is gone and read the first 5 or 6, maybe up to the first 8 years of National Lampoon. And I realized, wow, certain cultural institutions that seem really stodgy in retrospect, you forget that they were really amazing and had tons of great material in the early days. But also, you realize, even when you're looking at some of the best venues like that, the best publications, that everybody is very hit and miss. And whether it's SNL or Mad Magazine, right. The amazing stuff is going to intermingle with the stupidest shit you ever heard. And I was just happy when I could stop writing the stuff myself, because I remember a lot of sleepless nights. I always feel a lot of respect for any of the people who do the Gawker writers, any of the people who are just called upon to have some critical attitude at a day-to-day level. I just feel like it takes so much out of you, and I just remember going to sleep at night just being so worried about what somebody was going to say the next day.
Nowadays they don't even bother to write. They don't even bother to write endings anymore. They just sort of, you get these strong beginnings, these so-so middles, and it just ends. It doesn't. There is no ending. There's no conclusion. It's just, I earned my $50, and there you go.
But it's
I'm pretty forgiving of that kind of thing. I can definitely relate to
no, yeah.
People
if I were doing it for $50, I wouldn't put out this work either.
That's another reason why I'm always just amazed at anybody who writes a lot or has or maintains a very active textual presence anywhere. It's a lot. It takes a lot out of you. It's a lot of work, and it puts you out there.
Do it today.
It puts you out there mostly for the worse, not for the better. Rarely do you go out there and say something that's super right on. There's like one Ta-Nehisi Coates and then everybody else talking a lot of bullshit, you know. And the fact that you can get out there and not retract every single thing means you're probably doing something kind of miraculous.
You gonna put us back on track?
Not really, because this is gold, kind of. So I recognize gold when I hear it. But let me say this: you're talking about how you said I don't know how people do it today. The whole Gawker thing. Do you? So obviously we can say that, you know, Suck sort of set the template for that in the sense that it's this daily news stuff. But what about when people say that Suck set the template for what they, you know, everyone calls snark, the snarkiness of, say, Gawker or BuzzFeed or the way, you know, the blogs in the web, the voice of the blogs in the web today? How do you feel about that?
Carl and I have different things about, have different takes on this. Let Carl go.
We touched on that before. You know, I don't like it. For us, a lot of what we were doing had a structure and a theory behind it. So, for example, in Bart, in The Pleasure of the Text, writes about how readers insert both meaning and pleasure in the gaps of the text. So when we linked off site, you know, those, like nowadays they'd call them snarky links. But what we were doing when we linked off site, we would be undercutting our own argument or take it into a third space. And so Suck would literally embody an excess of the text and acknowledging it as a strategy for reading and understanding. So there was a intellectual context of what we were doing, which is so much more than snark.
Yeah, see, I have a different take too.
Please.
I just think that, like, basically we're all a bunch of whiny fucking babies, and that most that there's a tension going on, but that it's very well deserved. Like, I think that there's a tension between being respectful and speaking your mind, and I think it plays out in all of the contemporary politics and our cultural politics, and it gets really close to some of the core flaws that we all have as human beings, and, you know, really wanting to have thoughtful responses, but being very thin-skinned and not wanting to hear critiques. Like, you know, in real life, you don't get, like, the whiplash instructor who will throw symbols at your head. It doesn't really happen. There's not really a place these days for a legitimate instructor or commentator to play the drill sergeant. But you know that if you're building an army, you know, there is a space and a requirement for drill sergeantry. You know, there is a at a certain point you're going to get a lot better, and you know that the people that's sometimes the best things you can do for the people you care about is not necessarily to be nice for them. That's why, you know, sometimes you're cruelest to your family and your siblings. You know, an older brother will pick on their younger brother, as I learned. But they're kind of doing you a favor, you know, because nobody else is really going to get into it with you. And I think that there's a lot of that suppressed critical energy out there that people just, they want to say stuff. They want to say how unsatisfied they are with what they see, but they don't have the vocabulary to do it in a constructive way. And I think that it's a provocative space. I think at a certain point, it seemed like that stuff was necessary. It seemed like that kind of snarky tone was actually constructive. Now, when I look at it in 2016 and I see the worst sort of Gamergate manifestations of internet criticism and snarkiness and just vitriol, and you just think, maybe that's probably a dead end too. Maybe you don't need a drill sergeant. and maybe if you do need somebody to just be snarky, I mean, you just got to snark yourself, because if somebody did it for you, no matter even how on the money they might be, you would just hate them for it anyway.
My take on that is criticism is to put something into crisis, and the nihilistic impulse is to destroy everything, but only to build something up better again. So those are important aspects to critique and criticism, which is often lost today.
And there's also, when even the most simplistic dualisms like the snark smarm thing, they do get at something. I think of the internet as having its own body politic, and I look at discussion threads, and I often understand them as almost the manifestation of kind of conversations you normally would just have with yourself in your head. The chorus of doubt and disbelief and rudeness, like all the voices you have to tamp down from yourself that are always haunting you from the back of your head, they manifest as actual comments from these anonymous people you see on threads. So it's almost like people, even the stupid things are speaking for you, because you could almost see yourself being stupid enough to say them or think them, or you can imagine a time when you believed that kind of comment was called for or was worthwhile or was funny or was necessary. You can see yourself at age 13 or age 15 or last week making that same kind of comment, and then when you see it, you realize, oh no, it's just sort of cruel and depressing. But it doesn't seem like you're actually watching a scrum of other people. It's like you're watching, all of the factions from Disney's Inside Out having, free for all. There's a bunch of people who are at different moods, just sort of working without a filter.
But we're moving away from that, because there's becoming a one-to-one correlation between identity and the things we say. So if you have to be who you are when you say those things, it's much more difficult to build the distance to actually say that was me as someone else, or that was me at a different, that was me, but it was not quite me. That's getting more and more difficult to do.
Yeah, but it's kind of like the way that sometimes when you say something and you don't entirely know whether you believe it or not until you hear yourself saying it. That's sort of the first speaker liability. When people getting out there and saying stuff, I have a very conflicted relationship with the shit stirrers out there. I always disagree with their politics, but I do think that there's something vital about the people who just get almost mania-fueled, belligerent, and argumentative. I think there's a place for it. I just think that it's become such a reflexive component to online discussion that it can kind of seem useless. But then I'll go and I'll find a YouTube thread, and I'll remember that the real point in a lot of this stuff is people just trying to be funny, and sometimes they are. In a way, I think that the biggest problem we're facing sometimes as a culture is that everybody really wants to be hysterically funny. They want to be funny, and they want to hit with a one-liner. And one person's one-liner is another person's atrocity. Yes, it's cultural atrocity. I think a lot of the stuff you see is people legitimately, they think that the shit is funny.
I was always an advocate for pluralism, but I didn't foresee that it would become like this.
I almost was going to ask you that question, because in my dumb research here, I'm always going back to the original days of the web, where it's all utopian and it's going to be democratic. We're all going to have a voice or whatever. And so are you both in different ways kind of saying it is sort of like a paradise lost, that once we do have this great commons of discussion, it's just kind of ugly?
Oh, no. I never thought that we would, just because everyone can hear everyone else's opinions doesn't mean that anyone's going to agree with each other. It's just that something is achieved by having those opinions heard. People don't like other people's opinions by and large, and that was always going to be the case. Joey?
Yeah, and and I wouldn't say that I'm disillusioned. In a lot of ways, the internet definitely fulfills a promise. I mean, I'm basically a fan of the internet and the web as it is today. I think it's a lot better than it was in the 90s, and I think it's a lot more substantial. And it's I'm a lot less skeptical about it today than I was back then. And one of the things that I most enjoy sometimes is, for instance, going to a place like Fark.com, where I'm sure we all know Fark.
It still
and if you go to the politics,
it does still exist. Yes,
it does still exist. And wow. I often go to the politics boards there because it's the place where I found the most intense confrontational discussion between ultra liberals and complete, to the right of Mussolini conservatives. And I know that people, and half the discussion might be people accusing the others of being trolls, but I don't think that. I think there's more to it than
puppets. No, they're all sock puppets.
I don't think so. I don't think they're sock puppets. I think that some people just have a strong element of sock puppet to them already. Like, they're real people and also part sock puppet. They're both.
True.
But I also think that you can't ignore the fact that there's a performative aspect to these debates that can be very enlightening to see, even if you disagree with both sides, and that that it can be really illuminating, even if the people arguing are saying incredibly, risibly moronic things. To have them put voice to them and have somebody come and take the time to rebut them. For a rhetoric major, sometimes it's just like the most amazing thing to see, and I have to limit myself because I'll read that shit all day.
I would love to just have a camera over your shoulder while you're going through Reddit. I mean, Fark seems almost tame, I would think, compared to Reddit.
Well, the difference is that Reddit is also a lot terser of a platform. That Fark's last, people aren't of the TLDR mentality on Fark as much as they are on Reddit. Reddit is funnier. The one-liners that'll rise to the top on Reddit will land much more frequently than the supposedly funny comments on Fark will. But there isn't as much engagement with the bad actors. What I like about Fark is that there's a lot of engagement with the trolls. On Reddit, you'll see people just downvote the trolls, and they'll make reference oblique to the stuff that gets downvoted to oblivion, and you won't see it unless you're really opening up a lot of nested threads. I would do that too. But it's almost like on Reddit, the way to get in touch with that is almost at the level of subreddit, where you follow subreddits that inherently are confrontational.
I think the funniest, most intelligent discussions online are probably AV Club. Don't you?
Yeah.
They're very good. Yeah, there's good stuff on AV Club. I won't deny that. AV Club, they're better composed too. I see people also sometimes with more better. They achieve the dream of the character commentator in a way that I think Reddit aspires to, but doesn't always get. It's usually
right. Yes.
What about Vulture?
Vulture never has. I like a common thread with 1,000 posts on it. That to me is where the internet's starting to really get. It's like that it's like something meaty. If you can see 1,000 posts on it. That's why when I'd never understood when Denton or anybody else would do these moves to their commenting, their Kinja or whatever the messaging system, that seemed like they were always trying to tear off and shut down and silence people, when I just thought, you got to lead with the raw fact of the numbers of how much actual activity you have there, because that tends to reflect that one needle in a haystack that people can talk about.
Is it odd to you guys that 20 years on, we're still having that back and forth with audience engagement with just basic comments? I mean, going back to Pathfinder and turning on and off comments and things like that, like to this day, it's still news when a site all of a sudden declares, in puffy language, we're cleaning this up. We're going to change the comment culture and things like that. I can't believe that 20 years on, that's still a debate that we're having.
The fact that it's a debate is the reason why I spend a lot of my days getting down into the weeds, of the Reddit API, the Facebook API, the YouTube API, trying to engineer, different comment filters, different comment views, different nested views, just trying to find something that'll appeal to me as a consumer of comments as entertainment. Like, I still feel like that very few of these platforms are engineered to actually make the discussions be consumed as if they're a product, that are funny to read in their own right, with drama and personalities and highs and lows and twists.
So thanks to Joey saddling me with plastic, I got to write the comment engine for that, and I just threw all those tools at the participants and took away all the moderators, and that seemed to work pretty well.
Well, Joey,
so I really don't know what the big deal is nowadays.
Well,
except they don't write the right tools.
Carl and Joey, I'm gonna call it right now because we're at an hour and a half. But seeing as how we didn't get even to the second half of the story of Suck and then into the plastic era even, I'm going to call it now, but I'm going to invite you or encourage you or plead with you to maybe come back again for another episode someday in the future, and either we'll try to get to the second half of Suck, or I'll just wind you guys up and let you go again, because this has been awesome. As a fan of you guys, this has been amazing.
Cool.
Oh,
thank you.
So I'm going to say...
I always love talking with Carl. We've talked a lot more in the last year than we have in years. So
Okay.
You can, I think anytime you set up a call and get us and actually organize it, you'll probably end up getting us back on the line. So
well, you know what?
Thanks for the invite, and go for it.
Obviously I came in with my dumb history questions, but then I realized that there was so much more interesting stuff to talk about. So I very much like to have you guys back on again. My absolute final question for both of you is: Are you guys in touch today? Are you friendly? Do you talk very often today?
We're working on it. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah. No, we especially in the leading up to the 20th anniversary and over the past year or two, it's been an occasion for us to pick one another's minds about a lot of old questions, and it's been pretty motivating.
There was a decade in there that we did not speak to each other, so it's been good that we're talking again.
Listen, again,
that was just building up. That was building up story time.
You guys had to come up with new things to argue about. Listen, as fans of both you guys, that was fantastic. I'm gonna thank you for coming on the podcast. Serious, I'm being 100% serious. Let's do this again.
Okay, cool.
Right on. Okay.
If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. There's plenty more great internet history where that came from. And if you're a longtime listener, then you know what to do to help us out. Rate and review us on iTunes. Because iTunes gives credit to reviews and ratings, and the more great reviews we get, the more people will discover us. As always, there's more info on our website, www.internethistorypodcast.com. The show's Twitter handle is @NetHistoryPod, and my personal Twitter is @BrianMCC. Thanks for listening.